One thing I've noticed about high performing creators or business people is an ability to pivot. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode today. When should you lean into what makes you light up inside, your purpose, your authenticity? And today's guest did just that, from starting as a real estate agent through starting an education company and ending up in promoting a business where he does personality assessment. Our guest today, Brendon Lee, is a serial entrepreneur, a serial creator, and we had a really amazing conversation today, talking about the different types of genius you might have and leaning into that. We talked about his journey, pivoting quite often, his really thoughtful, structured process in figuring out what your purpose really is. And we end with the metaphor mishap or magic. But there's a really surprising thing that Brandon learned about people doing these personality tests. And he talked about what he found was beautiful about the process of his current activation. So without further ado, this is the Meaningful Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Buttner, and we help creators build the lives that they want by leaning into what's meaningful. So with that, let's jump into the episode. Hey, Brandon, welcome to the Meaningful Revolution podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Of course. We like to start out with a question, like a personal story.
Mhm.
And we know based on your bio that you've had an extensive career as a creator in different formats and methods. Is Could you share with us today a time when you felt like you radically maybe needed to make a change in your career or hack your behavior to succeed, why you needed that change, and then what happened?
That's hard to choose one because I've made so many transitions, but if I had to choose one, it would probably be between when I was transitioning out of real estate and transitioning into running the education company. So the backdrop
Okay.
was that I had been flipping houses for about 4 years, and I think I was relatively successful. I had a mentor that basically taught me everything. And basically, I reached a point where I felt like I had learned everything I needed to learn. And that my mentor had taught me everything he needed to teach me. And basically, everything felt like autopilot at that point. I was coasting and I was itching for something to sink my teeth into again, to pour my entire being into, to find something actually also a little bit more meaningful again. And so that
Yeah.
was the starting point. I think that was probably around 2016-ish. And basically my strategy that has been true for all of my transitions so far is just have a lot of conversations with people that I normally wouldn't have conversations with. That's usually been
Mm.
my path to finding my next thing, which is just like almost shotgun blast. Talk to a wide range of people, consume wide amounts of information, expose myself to new ideas that I never normally explore myself or expose myself to. And so
Yeah.
that's what I did for about 9 months. I actually tracked this in a spreadsheet. I got coffee, one-on-one coffee with over 200 people. And that was that was what one of the intents was to find my next thing. But the other intent was actually to find my own personal community because I didn't feel like I had a lot of friends at that time. But fast forward about 9 months, I ended up getting introduced to the person who would be my eventual co-founder. I think one thing is to
Okay.
notice is that I wasn't looking for a co-founder and I actually didn't know what I actually wanted to do after. I was just trying to throw myself out there until I found a thing that hit all the buttons in me that made me
Hmm.
internally go, ah, yes, this is the thing. So I actually tried a bunch of things. Like I tried working with an incubator. I tried like dabbling with a coaching service. I think I dabbled with an architecture firm. Ultimately, I became friends with this guy was, who had, I guess there was like a competition for $10 million of funding for
Hmm.
new high school ideas, like new models for high school. And he
Okay.
was already doing this for a year with his own team. And basically, by the time we met, it turned out that they didn't make it to the final prize. So he was in this transition of, okay, I've applied to this program and I didn't make it. So now what I do?
Mhm.
And we met around that same time. And so he was floating the idea of, oh, what if I turn this school idea into an after school program? And
Mm.
that's how we met, or that was the context in which we met. And when he told me that idea, everything in me just lit up. I'm like, oh yeah, let's do this. And basically we ran that as an experiment for about three months. And after that test, I was convinced. I'm like, great, let's do it. So altogether, that whole period of transition of being in real estate, feeling bored, feeling unengaged, feeling like I reached the top. It took me about a year actually to meet all those people, finally meet him, run that test to reach the level of conviction of let's switch. And then, yeah, and then I went working on that education company full time starting after that 3-month test. So that's an example of one of those transitions.
That's amazing. So I
Mhm.
love the idea of having, like, in a course of 9 months, 200 conversations.
Yeah.
I often this is called the meaningful revolution. It's all
Mhm.
about making that transformation in your
Mhm.
life to something more meaningful.
Yeah.
I was curious, how did one of those conversations go? Was it more of an exploratory, "Hey, you work on in this space. I just wanna figure out what you're doing," and
Yeah, I'll answer that question and also try to answer the question beneath the question. Uh,
okay,
Specifically, those questions or those conversations were all very high level get to know you questions and
okay.
conversations. Like it was the first time meeting someone or it was the first meaningful sit down with someone. Maybe I had a conversation with them in passing and then we were like, hey, like you seem interesting. Let's have a chat. And so that was the context. So it often just followed the arc of, hey, what do you do? Or like, how did you get to the reason why we met? Like maybe we met at an event or
Mhm,
something or at a mutual friends party or something. So we'd start there and then go into work. And then I would usually ask, what what drives you to do work? The work that you're
mm,
involved in. What inspired you to get there? What makes you engage? What makes you stay there? And so I'm trying to understand people's motivations because they can always be different. Someone can be, for example, since we're in the Bay Area, someone can be in tech but it could be so many different reasons why they're in tech. They could be in
mhm,
tech simply because one thing led to another, and now they're here. They could be there because they're really passionate about the possibilities of technology. They could be here because, I don't know, they studied it and it's just stable income. And
mhm,
so I try to assume that the motivation is much more interesting than the optics of the thing that they do. And I try to uncover that. And when I meet someone that's worth following up with, like continuing to build a relationship with, it's usually because they have a deeper meaning beyond what
mm,
like a superficial, I'm just doing this for money or I'm just here. I'd rather spend time with people who are deliberate, conscious, intentional than people who are floating by through life and not sure where they want to go. So that's specifically how those conversations would go. But the actual litmus test of how did I decide who I wanted to talk to
mhm,
was I would just purely be listening to my internal curiosity of like when I'm at like for example, at a meetup, for example, I'm talking to 10 different people during that event and I notice who do I feel most curious about by the end of
mm,
that day? Who do I feel most interested to learn about their story, the backstory? Maybe it's the way they carry themselves. Maybe there's something they said in passing that felt like someone needs to have a very particular life view or life experience to say that statement. So it's those little signals, and it's completely different for every person. But the core of it is I'm listening to curiosity. I'm listening to a pool inside of me that signals, ooh, I would be excited or interested to learn more about this person. And then I would reach out saying, hey, I'd love to get to know you more, maybe grab coffee, let's connect. And then some people would say yes, some people would say no. But most
mm.
of the time, people are flattered that you would be interested in them. Usually that works.
Right on. So then having these conversations, following your curiosity, which I absolutely love, I believe that finding your purpose in life or
Mhm.
purposes, like it's not usually just one. It's just
Totally.
maybe the one or few you have at this moment in time, but
Mhm.
is out with contact in the world. So what
Mhm.
you're doing, you're getting all these different ideas, you're trying to get exposed to new things. How did you know when you met someone, you followed that curiosity, their passion or their perspective or whatever was like, oh, I want more of that. Maybe that's a clue to my purpose. How did you match that up? Or did you? Maybe you didn't, but
So I guess to reframe the question, it's like, what is the connection between an initial conversation and how it connects to? me realizing purpose and figuring out my purpose.
Yeah. How did this inform your purpose as you went
Mm.
through? Or maybe another question is, how did you know that you didn't need to stop at like 10 people? You're like, oh, okay, I got what I wanted, or I figured out what I needed to figure out.
Sure. I think these conversations tend to get trickier or more or oversimplified for listeners. I'm trying to put myself
Yeah.
in the shoes of someone who is younger.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the times these conversations sound binary, and but the
Mhm.
reality is that it's just very emergent and incremental, right? So it's not that all of a sudden in one fell swoop that I realized, oh my God,
Mhm.
this is my purpose. There is an incremental journey of having one piece of the conversation that intrigues you. You double click on it, you have another conversation, and then you get more pieces, and you realize, oh wow, this is feeling way closer than before. You have another conversation, and either that feeling grows or that feeling stays the
Mhm.
same, or it shrinks, right? Because you meet someone, maybe they have just completely different values from you, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's not what I thought. It's actually not that different from dating or learning
Mhm.
or just any form of relationships, where there's a slow, incremental feel you out period, and then you get to
Mhm.
know each other more. And then if you're vibing in the same direction, then you spend more time, you lean into it. And then if not, you don't. So when it comes to the finding purpose and having these conversations, I think you just incrementally get closer. The more you follow that curiosity, the more you lean into it, you'll have more of a clear sense of what is up and what is down and what is purpose, closer to purpose than
Mhm.
and what is further from purpose.
Okay. And you mentioned a spreadsheet, so I was wondering, were you
Mhm.
mapping that out, or was it just a intuitive feel? Oh, this feels a little bit closer. Then that informs the next set of
Mhm.
curiosity and
I think
conversations.
the sheet was multiple factors. I think one, I was just curious. I just knew that the number of people I was meeting was outpacing my ability to remember those meetings. And I
Okay.
didn't want to reach a situation where I would see someone again and totally forget their life story, even though we
Mhm.
met like a month ago. So I think that was one layer of it. The other layer of it was I was trying to lay out my own thinking in terms of what made me want to spend time with this person again, as opposed to
Mhm.
not. And so in after every conversation, after I would update the sheet, I'd realize, yeah, this person had an interesting story, but I don't feel like they are on the same page as me. I don't feel like I have a deeper resonance with them. And
Mhm.
so documenting it really helped me think out loud in a certain way
Okay.
to separate people that, oh, these are just cool people that I've met versus, hey, these are people I really want to double down on and have further conversations or maybe become friends with because on a different level. So I think those were the biggest factors driving it.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I don't want to get like too in the nitty gritty details. It's just
Yeah.
again super fascinating. Just following it up on.
Yeah. It's interesting because I haven't done that since.
Oh,
It's like 10 years ago since I did that, and I haven't really found a reason to do that again. So,
awesome. Do you think so? Like the question I have now is, did you like settle on something that was like, oh, this is who I want to be and what I want to do out in the world 10 years ago, or you've just been busy and just getting after it?
you mean in terms of the conversation around purpose?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think I think how I would describe my purpose, it's been relatively consistent since my early 20s, where my mission in life is to be of service, to help as many people as possible. And I'm just not attached to how it looks. I just want to know
Hmm.
that the primary amount of energy that I'm devoting towards is to be of service to people around me and reduce suffering somehow, make people's lives easier somehow in a meaningful way.
Hmm.
And basically the different phases and parts of my career are just different expressions of it. So when at
Hmm.
a certain point, it was working with the homeless. At another point, it was working in real estate. At another point, it was running the education company. And I was in tech for a bit, and now I'm running this personality test company. So I'm not at all attached to how it looks, but what has been constant is, and that hasn't changed for almost 15 years, which is living a life of service to help people, to improve lives, help people self actualize, help people believe more in themselves, lift themselves up, feel more agency in life. Those are the kinds of themes that I've always been gunning for most of my adulthood.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel very connected to almost all of that myself. When I started, right, I've had a bunch of different lives and transitions myself out of
Yeah,
corporate America twice, out of
yeah,
tech twice, and like coaching and doing the podcast and connecting with people and finding ways to help people has been, that was the draw. So this is more fulfilling because you can see a more direct positive impact in people's lives.
yeah.
I love that. So you mentioned your personality test business.
We're gonna
And so I was curious about if you are a creator that is running a creator business, right? So you're trying to make your main source of income and everything, your created, the things that you create. Is there a so I'm trying to like, maybe this is too many ideas at once. I'm trying to connect with how can figuring out your personality help you as a business person or as a creator? That's the question.
Sure. That's the entire intention of the assessment that I built is to help create self-awareness to best know how you operate so that you can know the areas in which areas in your life in which you have almost like a bonus attached to your being. You know how
Okay.
in like video games you get the gear and you get 3x regen, health regen or something, or
Yeah.
another gear that gives you like 3x mana regen, or it's basically the intention of the personality test is highlighting you have this invisible set of 3x regen in some particular arena that you might
Hmm.
not know about, or maybe you have like, an intuition about, but you don't feel like it's explicit, or
Hmm.
you don't feel like you're explicitly wielding it. So that's, I think, the intention. And I think that's the possibility with any personality test. And I think a well-designed personality test, the better designed it is, I think the more equipped it is to do that. So I think that's the intersection for me. I'm realizing in even building the assessment, I'm realizing, oh, okay, like I really specialize in frameworks and structured thinking and
Hmm.
strategy. And and it's allowed me to double down on that and stop expecting myself to be more in the feel, be more in the artistic, be more like this is my form of genius. And I think seeing the numbers of my own scores just gives me rest to not feel like I have to be someone else and like truly and just double down on embracing this is what I like excel at and find easy. Might as well spend more time doing that. And you'll find people across the entire spectrum of some people are far more artistic and don't like being in the structured thinking. It's in my data of the personality test. And so I think when people see that and embrace that, it now just becomes a question okay, how do I manage the downsides of this particular genius? Because there's downsides for every single one, or there's trade-offs for
Hmm.
every single one. So I think that's the self-awareness component, and I think that's how it helps. The more you have awareness, the less baggage and self-talk that you have internally to fight against
Hmm.
yourself of, oh, I should do this or I should be more like that. It removes all of that. And so it frees up thinking energy, emotional energy, and just being energy to throw at the thing that you're working on full send without any reservations.
Right on. Yeah, my experience with personality tests is years ago I worked at Walmart corporate and they're
Okay.
really big on the Berkman test.
Sure. I've heard of it.
What I found surprising going through that exercise without going into what the actual test is, it gives you a way to think about people,
Yeah.
yourself. So you have that self actualization and then a way to relate to other people. Oh, I know this person is by the book process oriented. I need to talk about the rules and the process versus this person who just likes to talk. So I'm curious, maybe you can explain maybe at a high level the different types of genius you've found through your personality test and how they might interact differently in the world.
Sure. So there's seven geniuses. One of them is around attuning to emotion. There's another one that's
Mhm.
more around intuition and gut. And then the one that I mentioned that I'm strong in is more heady. So you have this kind of three decision making centers, geniuses of head, gut, and heart. And then you also have one that's about curiosity that is, or breadth of curiosity. So it's not that they
Mhm.
are curious about things, but they're widely curious about things. And then there's another genius that's about pushing limits and challenging themselves for challenge sake. And another genius around creative expression. And one last genius around the impact that they have on other people and wanting to be of service. So yeah, those are the seven. And specifically, what makes this assessment unique is that it is about enjoyment and not
Mm,
competence or frequency.
mm,
Because you can do a thing a lot and not enjoy it. You can be good at a thing and not enjoy it. That's most people in their 9 to 5s.
right.
And so I think
Yeah.
that's what separates this assessment from a lot of the others. And it's not designed for, I guess it's not designed primarily for a work context. So I think that's what a lot of other like work assessments miss, is that they were designing to optimize people at work. But of us are actually bringing our full selves to work. For most of us, we have to like compartmentalize. And
Mhm.
so what I like about the assessment is it creates us a picture of you as you outside of work. And
Mhm.
maybe that informs how
Mm.
you show up at work, but it captures more things, I feel, than what an average professional corporate assessment does. But yeah, to answer the question, those are the seven geniuses.
Okay. Just that out of curiosity, then, you were to, if I were to take this test and then my
Mhm.
wife would take this test, and we would find out what type of geniuses we were,
Yeah.
do you have any data or how to relate them specific types of genius? Or could this be something that makes my relationship stronger with my wife
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
anyone? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, even in my own life, my my girlfriend and I talk about our results all the time, and it just gives us language now to realize, oh, so she scores high on the creative expression one. So as a result, when she does things in the day to day that are around that genius, we both realize and say, oh yeah, I'm doing the artisan thing now, and so that just helps create level expectations for both sides of how we show up in life. I scored negative on the one that's around emotional attunement. So it just means that it costs a lot more energy and effort for me to show up in that particular way. And so now that she's aware of that, she can calibrate her expectations. And instead of thinking, oh, like, why doesn't Brandon do XYZ? It's now, oh, Brandon's not doing that because he's low on that. Okay. So it creates more space for us just to be ourselves. And because of, and when you understand each other's highest geniuses, you also have a framework of, oh, that explains why they do that behavior all the time. And so I think that's just a general one, and that's happened multiple times for I don't know, over 1,000 people have taken it, and I've gotten stories left and right around that kind of thing. So yeah, absolutely, it helps with significant others, helps with friendships, helps with colleagues, lots of applications.
Right on. I'm
And
curious if you wanted to develop a particular competence or genius, can this assessment help you? Or is it just assessing a snapshot of who you are and that's locked in? Or is that malleable?
what I'm trying to comment on with the assessment is this is where things are at right now with how you relate to this genius. I think outside of you going through like a traumatic life experience or like something that really shifts your perspective, I don't think the macro shape of your geniuses will change that much. Like I'd be skeptical to see that someone's lowest becomes their highest unless something dramatic happens. But I think thematically they will remain consistent and maybe small changes can happen. Maybe your like second becomes your third or your third becomes your second, stuff like that. But there is a section in the results page with the assessment that talks about, hey, if you score low in this genius, here are a couple things you can do about it. Here's maybe you won't enjoy this as much because maybe that doesn't change as much, but here's things that you can do to strengthen it as a skill or as a competence to know how to speak that language, right? Because it's not about competence, it's about enjoyment. So
Mhm.
even for me, even though I'm low on the emotional attunement one, that doesn't mean I can't feel my feelings. It doesn't mean that I don't know how to label and articulate my feelings. It just means it costs me more energy, right? So it's the same thing across for everyone. It just doesn't mean that you can't operate there. It just means that it costs you more energy, and so you just don't use it as much. So
Okay. So it's more of a energy cost type thing where
I
your
think,
genius generally is probably least resistance and then
yeah,
your I don't want to call it your like dumbest one, but like your least genius one is
mhm.
okay. I got it.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, because if you just think about stuff you enjoy in life, I don't have to force you to do anything you enjoy. You're gonna do it,
Yeah.
right? But it's the stuff that you don't enjoy that I'm like, hey, Sean, you got to do the thing you don't enjoy right now. Like, what happens to your body? How do you react internally? You just, there's like a dread and you're like, I don't know, do I have to? Like, okay, only if the incentives make sense, then fine, I'll do it. Right.
Mhm.
So that's the case for everybody across the different geniuses, where some of them, you don't need to tell me to do it. I'm just going to do it all the time. And then there's other geniuses that I'm like, right, pulling teeth. So,
Okay. I'm curious then. So I'm a high performance coach.
was it?
So my job is to push people
Yes.
usually. And so I'm trying to think if I was to apply this to clients that I have,
Mhm.
sometimes you have to operate in the
Mhm.
places that aren't your genius for the bigger picture, for the bigger
Sure.
purpose. Do you talk about strategies to like when the necessity is there to
Mhm.
manage that? Is it just have to build or just be aware that this is going to be a huge lift? I'm introverted. So going to a big conference and talking to a million people in one
Mhm.
day is that sense of existential
Sure.
dread for me.
Mhm.
But I have a business. I have that desire to help people. That's
Sure.
something I got to do from time to time, and I
Mhm.
prep for it. So, how do you, this idea of finding your performance edge, of really being performative when you need to, even if it's your least favorite thing, do you talk about that at all in the assessment?
I don't think I comment specifically on that layer. Yeah, because that's just really nuanced to pack into an
Yeah, yeah,
entire
yeah.
result. But in terms of my reactions to that, I'm like, as a coach myself over the last 10 years or so, I think it just gives you awareness around how you nudge people. Just helps you see the distance traveled that the other person might have to traverse for that particular goal. I think that's the biggest thing. Because absolutely, you're right. I think, yeah, everyone has the time and place that they are willing and wanting to push. I think another layer of this also is that people who take this assessment and people who look at coaching to begin with, they have to be on a certain level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to be willing to
Mhm.
think about, oh, how do I design my life around enjoyment? And how
Yeah.
do I, because otherwise you're at a certain point where you have more pressure, at least to address the lower rungs of your life. If you're not going to be able to pay the bills next month, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to do the hard thing.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're going to get evicted or,
Yeah.
or whatever. So it's just, yeah, that level of pushing only happens because you're at a certain place in your life. And then everything else, after you reach that point, though, once you get enough high enough on that ladder, then everything just becomes trade offs and choices. And you push because you think the trade off is worth it. Maybe it's compelling for you in the moment to stretch that part of you, or maybe the outcome it's worth it. But doing hard things is rarely in a vacuum in of itself of just doing the hard thing just because. Usually it's
Mhm.
because there's an outcome that someone cares about. As a coach, I think it just creates awareness again around how much distance someone needs to travel to do that specific thing. And if
Right
the
on.
incentive on the other side is big enough, then yeah, likely they'll do it. And so,
It makes sense. Yeah. It's more the whole framework is to design a life that you enjoy. And
mhm,
sometimes there's those things that we don't enjoy. But yeah, I like the idea of it just being a way to understand and
yeah,
maybe, okay, we really need to focus on some strategies here to get you into gear for this because
yeah,
you're expecting
yeah.
greater happiness and joy after it.
Yeah, if anything, yeah, to double click a little bit more as a coach, I think it just creates more awareness or not only on the distance traveled, but also what is the carrot that motivates this person
Mhm.
extra, right? So maybe for someone who scores high on the wanting to impact people genius. So when there's something that they want to do or something that's really hard in front of them, you as a coach might remind them that, hey, remember again why you're in this. Who is the person that you're trying to make a difference for? And it's calling back into remembrance that motivator. Or
Mhm.
maybe like for someone who's more somatic or more intuitive, you reflect back to them, hey, there's this really hard thing. Maybe listen to your body right now. Check in with yourself. What is your gut saying about how you want to relate to this particular challenge? So, like, it could affect the style of coaching that you cater to each individual, and maybe yield more results because that's the language that they're speaking in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right on. If, say, you're somebody that takes this test, you find out what your genius is, you
Mhm.
compare it to your life right now, and you're like, and you're in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it's like you do have agency to make a change. You're like, oh, I'm in a sales job And really, I want to be doing, I don't know, art. I don't know what the exact scenario
Sure.
is, but
Sure.
basically, you identified your genius. You're not doing it in your day to day life. How would you go about suggesting people transition to that? Since you've had
Mhm.
so many pivots in your life, and it seems like a really good tool to figure that out
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
make some shifts.
Yeah. Yeah, I think general best practice, I would suggest people to run experiments. So if let's just run with the example, you're in sales and you realize going more the artistic route is something that feels resonant, feels true to you. So I'm like, okay, in your evenings, your weekends, start running experiments like that. Start spending your time investigating for like mediums that resonate with you, forms of art. Start looking for artist communities in the forms of art that matter to you, and just slowly, incrementally ramp up that time. The more, again, fall back to our original thread around curiosity. If you find energy there as you explore on
Mhm.
the side, spend more time there, and you keep doing that until you reach an internal breaking point of you might think, holy shit, I found the thing. I don't want to do
Mhm.
this medium in this way. And I'm ready to like cut the cord of my job. I highly, that's a very proven path. And I think that's a very incremental and tested path rather than the whole, I, I hate my job and I want to do art. Let's quit it. Like
Mhm.
just cold
Yeah.
turkey. I don't think that's the right path for most people. I think most people, at least from a nervous system standpoint, would do much better with the incremental version of that. Yeah. To answer the question in a brief form is, yeah, test it slowly, run a small experiment in the evenings, weekends, spend more time on it as you reach more confidence and excitement about it until you finally get to the point. And it might take you a year, it might take you 5 years to get to that point. But when you get to that point of, holy shit, this is it, then cut the cord because you'll be ready and you'll have a grounded conviction about it.
And then what I love about that approach too is, and my coaching practice, so many people have an idea of what they think they want.
Mhm. Oh, yeah,
And,
totally.
and then you get into it, you're like, oh, I'm gonna like volunteer at the law firm. This is
Yeah.
a lot of reading and office politics. I don't like this at all,
Yeah.
and that's good information to know. And definitely before you do the grand axing of your current situation to align about around something else.
Exactly. Yeah. That is the opposite part of what I did not mention. But yes, that's why you run experiments because you find out that maybe the thing that you thought you wanted is not actually what you wanted.
Mhm. Definitely. Is there, this is a random, well, more random question, but is there anything beautiful that you found in doing this work, building this assessment, just about people, about the world, or something that
Oh my
surprised
God.
you?
Absolutely. So when I built this, the way that I built it was I ran 300 user interviews and they were about an hour each. And I
Hmm.
basically was trying to understand people as they are through the lens of life experiences. So I was asking people to
Mm.
share stories of their life. And I would collect eight moments from each person's life. And so that's over 200, like 2,000 data points. And when I started doing these interviews, I was not attached or to what categories I was assessing. I didn't even know what I was assessing. I just wanted to figure out like what is out there. And
Hmm.
as I had more of these conversations, I realized that there's these common buckets. I'm like, hey, this person rhymes with that person and it rhymes with
Mm.
that person. And that's how I started initially clustering people together into the genius categories that we actually mentioned. So by the time that I just defined actually it started at a six before it like maybe a while later, I added the seventh. But one of the most surprising geniuses was the one around intuition. I like if you asked me to design an assessment from scratch and a personality test, I would not have pegged intuition to be one of the core things that I'm measuring. But it became like really inescapable once I had a series of 3 or 4 conversations almost back to back of people that were incredibly highly intuitive that my younger self would have just written off as these people are way too woo and they're like space cadets. They can't
Hmm.
explain anything concretely. They just say, it just felt right and I did it. And then, but it was too inescapable because they had so many specific stories along those lines and it was
Hmm.
multiple different people. And I'm like, either this is totally fake or there's something I'm missing in terms of my
Yeah.
lived experience. And so I'm really glad I ran with that because that is now an entire category. And those people
Mm,
who take the assessment are the ones that feel most validated and seen by my assessment because
mm,
there's no other assessment like our conversation around corporate, right? Like all corporate is not friendly to intuition. I don't think that's like
yeah.
that's a pretty well known fact. And so here comes along an assessment that actually creates validation for that and saying, this is a really powerful genius and this is how it shows up. There's no cultural education around how to operate in intuition because it's
Yeah.
beat out of us from both from a school and work standpoint. So I think that's one very clear example of my life is so much richer because now I understand this as a way to live and be. And there are plenty of people on the planet that is their highest genius. And
Mhm.
they feel completely dismissed or written off in the corporate context. And especially actually people like me who are more thinky. Like we demand the explanation. We demand what is the framework? What is your rationale? And
Mhm.
these intuitive people don't always have that, but that doesn't make them any less valid or their gifts any less valid or anything.
Mhm.
And if anything, we've actually been like, it's been a disservice in that we've shunned them from most corporate environments. And so I feel like I have a lot of power in kind of representing the thinky corporate world to welcoming them back into the fold and celebrating them and creating just conversational fluence around, hey, this world of intuition has a lot to offer us. Let's actually listen. That's been one of my favorite parts of working on this is, in your words, it's one of the most beautiful things. I think it's very cathartic to feel like I'm
Awesome.
opening the door in some way back for the whole segment of the population that feels hidden and swept under the rug. So yeah.
Right on. That's super, super cool. And I agree with you. A lot of, I, I think the best leaders, the best performers have a combination of, or have some form of that intuitiveness.
Yeah.
Um, but it's something a lot of thinky people, as you said,
Yeah.
would immediately discredit because what,
Yeah.
okay, you just pulling that out of the air. All right. But
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Starting to wrap up. Is there anything people can do right now to immediately better their lives in their creative journey or their business journey from your perspectives? Maybe it's the assessment or maybe it's something completely different, but
It's I mean, of course, my recommendation would be take the assessment. It's also free, so, like, it
yeah.
doesn't hurt you. It only takes 10 minutes, but even outside of taking the assessment, it's maybe taking the philosophy that I've learned as a result of building the assessment
All
and
right on.
helping people through understanding the results of their assessment, which is just fundamentally everything in your life that you find resistance to or dread, there's someone on
Mhm.
the planet who enjoys it. And
Mm,
that was so hard for me to wrap my mind around. I've heard people say that before, but it wasn't until I saw the data actually how it makes sense of it. Because I never met, it was hard to talk. I never had conversations with specific people that were like, oh, that thing you hate, that like you like transcribing this data from to this Excel sheet, you hate that. You know what? I love that. Like you don't have conversations with those people very often. So in having built my assessments and have had people go through it and also had like people that I've hired go through it, I now have like very tangible experiences and stories of, wow, there are literally people that every aspect of my life that I hate doing or dread, I can literally point to a person that's, oh, let me do that because I like it. And that was initially so mind blowing. But now that I've been working on this for a few years, it's just permeated how I see and think. And so now it shifts your thinking to thinking, how do I try to do all of my creative work by myself? How do I lift this organization or this vision or this company that I have off the ground all by myself? And
mhm.
shifts you to thinking, okay, these are the things that I love doing and come easy to me. How do I find, partner, meet other people who like the very thing that I dread? I absolutely hate, like, would give so much to not do it ever again. And how do I find people who love that? And of course, my assessment gives a way for people to quantify that now. But that as a philosophy, I think just changes so much. It creates so much more spaciousness, openness for collaboration and wonder and appreciation for each other, realizing that yeah, like I can't do it all myself. Or there's a few people who have that capacity. For the rest of us normies, it's about understanding what comes easily to us and then, yeah, sifting through the people in our lives that and looking for people in our lives who can complement us really well. So I think that would be the most concrete thing I could lend to your listeners, even if they never taken my assessment. I hope you take that to heart. Maybe there is someone in your life where that concrete thing that you've been avoiding all day and all week, or maybe months or even years, there's another person close to you, or maybe one conversation away that absolutely loves that and would do it for fun, do it for free, right? You don't have to tell me to do data analysis. You give me a spreadsheet, give me a bunch of data. That's fun for me. And that might be weird to you. That might be weird to everyone listening, but that's my brand of weird. And that's what the assessment helps surface. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
That's awesome. I think that's probably what we'll end with the main portion of the podcast. I do have a segment called Metaphor, Magic, or Mishap, where we try to come up
Cool.
with a metaphor on the fly about what we talked about. And it's either great or it's funny because we completely missed it. Just as a fun thing. If there was, so what's coming to my mind is this is like understanding yourself, that self-assessment, understanding other people and where they are. It's like seeing the code in the matrix,
Yes.
where it's very powerful to stop things you don't like or to shift or change things if you're aware of what's really going on. How does that resonate for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Liken it to a form of seeing the matrix. Absolutely.
Sweet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Then I guess, was there anything you really loved about what we talked about today? Or something that really spoke to you from our conversation?
I'm actually surprised and really love that you asked the question around what's the most beautiful thing that you've learned in building it. I don't think I would have expected that as a question, but I think there is a part of me that really enjoys sharing that part of the journey because it feels significant. It feels profound to feel like I'm shining a light in an aspect of society that kind of has written off and ignored.
Mhm.
And it feels like a real honor or privilege or powerful to be able to bring that up. And yeah, that rarely comes up in conversation. So I'm really glad that
Hell yeah.
whatever prompted you to ask that, I'm really glad you did. Sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And then signing off, where can the good folks follow up and take this mighty assessment
Yeah,
and
it's
improve?
geniusofyou.com, genius of you as it sounds, because fundamentally the belief is everyone has inherent genius. And my job and my goal is to try to help you understand that better. But yeah, if people go ahead and take it, I've been pretty generous with this, but if you email me or just submit through the contact form and you want personal commentary from me, just do that. Just drop me a line. I think I have my emails in the results and you can reach me at the contact page. It's one thing to take an assessment and try to parse out your results yourself. It's another
Mhm.
to have input from the guy who made it. And I'm happy to do that because it's made such a big difference for me. And I just care about helping people live a life that fits more with that. To me, that's the kind of world I would want to live in. And so I'm happy to do that if people are interested.
Awesome. Definitely take up Brendon on this. The link will be in the show notes too. If you're worried about spelling or whatever,
Mhm.
your rails
Yeah.
go really quick when you're listening to a podcast.
Yeah.
With that, thank you so much for being on the show and talking about what you're passionate about. I'm really excited to take this assessment myself. Well, that was a great episode with Brendon. And if you've ever had to pivot in your career, in your life, make a big life change, it is a difficult thing. And I think it's really cool hearing about how he's made the different career choices in his life and ended up with his personality assessment, which I took, and my results, as I pull up my notes here, I'm a deconstructor, assessor, innovator. So, and I thought that was pretty accurate for what it's worth. I definitely go to Genius of You to scope out your personality test. And if you want to listen to another episode about when to make big pivots, I have that in the show notes below, or if you're watching on YouTube, somewhere around where you see my face. So with that, thank you for listening to the Meaningful Revolution podcast. I'd love for you, if you could, share this episode with 2 or 3 friends you think might find it interesting or might be in a pivot moment of their life. or might need to make a change. And hopefully this conversation then will help them, nudge them one way or the other to make the change or not. So with that said, we'll see you guys in the next episode of the Meaningful Revolution podcast.